So, with Chinese forces amassed on the border, tough talk from Beijing, and protesters not backing down, what now? For that, we turn to Kenneth Lieberthal. He was Senior Director for Asia on the National Security Council staff during the Clinton administration. He's now Professor Emeritus at the University of Michigan. And Min-Shin Pei is Professor of Government at Claremont McKenna College. He writes extensively about China. And welcome to you both. Min-Shin, I want to start with you. Does the fact that the protesters have left the airport, that very tense moment has somewhat died down, does that give you any hope that maybe things are overall dying down?
Yes, this is clearly a turning point. I think the protesters have committed an unforced error, and they recognized this. So there should be a period of de-escalation. What is unknown is what the government will do. If the government takes advantage of this period and start arresting more protesters or even charging them, then we can see a return of the protesters. So things are still quite fluid.
Well, hundreds of protesters have already been arrested. Based on what you've heard from the government so far, what do you think the Chinese government will do?
Well, first of all, the Hong Kong government has arrested them, and so it's up to the Hong Kong government to decide whether to charge those who have been arrested or whether to prosecute those who have been charged. So this is up to the Hong Kong government. What the Chinese government wants to do really depends on whether the Hong Kong government can maintain control of the situation. A few days ago, it certainly seemed that the Hong Kong government was losing its grip. Today, I'm a little bit more relieved.
Ken Lieberthal, what do you think about this? How do you assess where we are right now?
I agree that there is a moment here that possibly could be seized to find a way forward and get us out of a conundrum that could otherwise produce a tragedy. But I think that way forward will require first an initiative by the Hong Kong government, to my mind likely including a willingness by the Chief Executive, Carrie Lam, to step down, some outreach to the major constituencies across Hong Kong to form some sort of commission to review what's happened and carry out necessary investigations and give their opinion. Essentially a long-term trust-building process that can ease tensions and stop a situation where radicals, the most radical elements among demonstrators are seizing the initiative and frankly, moving beyond what I think Beijing can possibly tolerate.
But when, Ken Lieberthal, back to you, when you hear how the Chinese government has been speaking so far, right? They're labeling this terrorism, they're calling the protesters criminals, you see the troop movement and build up, the color revolution comparisons now. Does it sound like they're laying the groundwork for some kind of intervention?
They are laying the groundwork for an intervention, but I think that they really strongly prefer not to move in with force. They really want the Hong Kong government to get on top of this. To the extent the Hong Kong government fails to find a way to do that, I think we will see increasing use of force. I don't think anything like Tiananmen from 1989 is in the cards. The world has changed since then, and Hong Kong is not a student movement in Beijing 30 years ago. But we could see a lot happen that would do tremendous damage to Hong Kong, to China, to U.S.-China relations, and to the region.
Min-Shin Pei, if those steps that Ken Lieberthal laid out don't happen, and you've seen an escalating, a ratcheting up of tensions from both sides, you were writing about this, you said it appears to be careening towards a devastating climax. Are you worried there could be some kind of Tiananmen-type crackdown?
Well, it really depends on what happens in the next 45 days, because China is going to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic. It's politically, symbolically very important. And the Chinese government would like to, of course, prefers to have an uneventful celebration. But if, for example, this continuation of this hardline position from Beijing, at least rhetorically, and then the kind of things Professor Lieberthal has laid out fail to take place, that is, concessions made by the Hong Kong government, we can see a return of the protesters very close to the celebration of the 70th anniversary.
But are they really going to wait 45 days? If the protests pick back up and continue, would they wait that long before taking action?
Well, it's a very difficult decision for the Chinese government to make. I think this is really their last resort. They're not going to act until Hong Kong is paralyzed. Suppose there were another general strike that paralyzes Hong Kong, that might force Beijing's hand. But we're quite far away from that point so far.
Ken Lieberthal, some of the language leads us to believe that Beijing views this very much as an existential threat, that if the protests pick back up and if they continue, they will in some way be forced to act. Do you see it that way?
Yes, I do. But the question is, when they're forced to act, that doesn't necessarily mean to have a large number of troops move across the border from Shenzhen, PLA in the streets, et cetera. You could have a declaration by the Hong Kong government of a state of emergency in Hong Kong, some curtailment of civil liberties, stronger actions by the Hong Kong police and judiciary, escalate to potentially using the Beijing PLA garrison in Hong Kong to be a presence on the streets. There are a whole series of things you can do shy of having tanks moving across the border. And I think they will more likely try to increase the pressure step by step. But I very much agree with Min-Shin. This is a very dangerous situation, and frankly, no one knows exactly what the politics in Beijing are among the leadership that inevitably will play a role in how this is handled there.
Min-Shin, very briefly, if you can, what is at stake here for the Chinese government? How is Beijing assessing this?
Well, it's really its authority in Hong Kong, because the Beijing government is seeing this challenge as not a challenge to the Hong Kong government, but to the authority of the Chinese government.
So we've seen what President Trump has had to say so far. Is there or should there be a role for the U.S. in all of this?
Yes, there should be a role, but the role should be very delicate, quiet. I think one thing President Trump can do is to pick up the phone and have a quiet conversation with President Xi Jinping and urge him not to intervene.
Ken Lieberthal, what do you make of this? How should the U.S. be acting, if at all, at this moment?
We should be making some suggestions about how to move forward in this situation and maintain peace. Clearly, if this goes off the rails, it will be enormously damaging to U.S.-China relations, among other things, in the region.
Min-Shin Pei and Kenneth Lieberthal, thank you very much to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.